Picture a sick room in 2nd century Rome. A woman lies on a wooden bed, fever burning through her body. The physicians have come and gone, they bled her, applied their poultices, muttered their incantations to Asclepius. Nothing worked. Now a different visitor enters. No medical bag, no instruments, just hands and words and something the Roman authorities will later call dangerous. The visitor places both hands above the woman's head, never touching, and begins to speak in a language that sounds like no language at all. Within minutes the fever breaks. By morning the woman is walking. By the end of the week she is testifying to everyone who will listen about what happened in that room. And that testimony will eventually get both her and her healer killed. Because what occurred in that room was not just healing. It was a threat to an entire economic system built on sickness, dependency, and control. 300 years later, church councils will systematically erase every record of what early Christians actually did when someone fell ill. They will reclassify these practices as heresy. They will hunt down the practitioners. They will burn the manuscripts that explained how ordinary believers accessed healing power without priests, without payment, without permission from any authority. And they will replace those practices with something they could control: prayers to saints, relics for sale, miracles that only happened through official church channels. But here is what they could not erase. The practices themselves, hidden in fragments, preserved in condemned texts, passed down through underground lineages that survived 17 centuries of suppression. And tonight, you're going to learn exactly what those early Christians did, why it worked, and why an entire industry needed it classified as heresy to survive. If you feel a pull toward this information right now, if something in you recognizes this as important, do two things immediately. Subscribe to this channel because what is coming in the next videos goes deeper than anything you have encountered. And comment the words, "I remember the healing," because that comment is not just engagement. It is activation. It tells the algorithm to spread this teaching to others who are searching for what was taken from us. Now take a breath, let your shoulders drop. What you are about to learn has been waiting for you specifically. The healing practices of early Christians were not what you see in churches today. There were no prayer chains, no anointing services with hundreds watching, no celebrity healers on stages demanding faith offerings. The earliest Christian communities practiced something completely different, something so effective and so accessible that it terrified the people who would later build Christianity into an empire. The practice was called imposition, but not imposition as enforcing something. Imposition as in imposing a higher frequency onto a lower one, placing divine order onto material chaos. And every single believer was taught to do it, not just apostles, not just elders, everyone. The Didache, one of the oldest Christian documents outside the canonical scriptures, contains instructions for something modern scholars cannot explain. It describes a practice performed in private homes where believers would gather around the sick, place hands in specific positions above and around the body, and enter a state the text calls henosis. Union, merging, becoming one stream with the source. In this state they did not pray for healing, they commanded it. Not with arrogance, but with the absolute certainty that they were not separate individuals asking a distant God for favors. They were expressions of the divine temporarily focused in human form, rearranging matter according to spirit. The results were immediate and undeniable. Fevers vanished, blind eyes opened, paralyzed limbs moved, demons, which is what they called psychological torment and spiritual oppression, fled instantly. And here is the critical part: no money changed hands, no hierarchy controlled access, no institution claimed ownership of the power. This was direct transmission available to anyone who understood their true nature. Do you see the problem? If healing is free, accessible, and doesn't require an intermediary, what happens to the priests? What happens to the system that profits from sickness? What happens to the authority structure that derives its power from being the gatekeeper between humanity and the divine? The entire model collapses. So they killed it, but they did it slowly, carefully over centuries. First, they elevated certain healings while suppressing others. Miracles performed by officially recognized saints were celebrated. Healings performed by ordinary believers in home gatherings were suspect. Then they required authorization. You could not perform healing ministry without approval from church leadership. This created a bottleneck, a control point. Then they added theology. They taught that sickness might be God's will, that suffering might be redemptive, that healing should be prayed for but not expected and certainly not commanded. And finally, they declared the direct practices heretical. Anyone teaching imposition outside official channels was accused of sorcery, consorting with demons, or the catch-all charge that ended thousands of lives: Gnosticism. Let me take you into what actually happened during these healing sessions. The practice had 3 phases, and understanding them will change everything you think you know about how healing works. Phase 1 was recognition. Before touching the sick person, before speaking any words, the healers would enter a state of absolute knowing. Not hopping, not believing, but knowing with complete certainty that the person before them was not fundamentally broken. Sickness was seen as a distortion, a frequency disruption, a forgetting of original wholeness. The healer's first task was to see past the symptoms, past the diagnosis, past the suffering, and recognize the divine blueprint that existed before the illness and would remain after it. This was not positive thinking. This was perceptual training. They practiced seeing what was true in the spiritual realm even when the material realm showed the opposite. And this seeing had power, because consciousness affects matter. Observation changes the observed. When a healer looked at a sick person and saw only wholeness, only divine perfection, only the completed healing, that seeing began to reorganize the person's energy field before a single word was spoken. Phase 2 was alignment. Once recognition was established, the healer would position their hands in specific locations around the sick person's body, not random locations. Precise points that correspond to what we now call energy centers or chakras, though the early Christians did not use those terms. They called them gates, places where spirit enters matter, where the divine frequency can be imposed most effectively. One hand above the head, one hand above the heart, or one hand above the throat, one hand above the solar plexus. The positioning varied based on the type of illness, but the principle remained the same. Create a circuit, establish a direct channel between source and body, and here is what the suppressed texts reveal. The healers were not sending their own energy. That would exhaust them, and it did exhaust the later Christian healers who misunderstood the practice. The early practitioners understood they were conduits, not sources. They aligned themselves so completely with the divine frequency that their hands became transmission points. The power flowed through them, not from them. Phase 3 was declaration, and this is where everything you were taught about prayer falls apart. The healers did not ask God to heal the person. They did not petition, they did not beg. They spoke as God, not blasphemy, recognition. They understood what the Gospel of Thomas stated plainly: the kingdom of heaven is inside you and outside you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. From that state of knowing, they spoke words that were not requests but commands. Be whole, be restored, be aligned. Rise, walk, see. 3 words, 4 words, never long prayers, just direct, absolute statements spoken with the full weight of divine authority. And the body obeyed, not because the healer was special, but because matter always responds to spirit when spirit speaks with clarity and certainty. Now let me show you what happened when this practice spread. By the end of the 2nd century, Christian communities across the Roman Empire were known for 2 things. They took care of their sick, and their sick got better at rates that defied explanation. During the plagues that swept through Rome, while pagan priests fled the cities and physicians hid in their villas, Christians stayed. They moved through the plague houses performing imposition on the dying. And a significant percentage survived, far higher than any other group. The Romans noticed. Some converted because of what they witnessed, but others saw a different implication. If Christians can heal without doctors, without temples, without the entire medical religious infrastructure that generates enormous wealth, what else might they make obsolete? The threat was not just theological, it was economic. The cult of Asclepius, the god of medicine, operated healing temples throughout the empire. These temples were massive revenue generators. The sick would travel hundreds of miles, pay for sacrifices, pay for dream interpretation, pay for treatments, pay for amulets and charms. The priests of Asclepius were wealthy and politically connected. And suddenly, a growing movement of people was healing each other for free in private homes using practices anyone could learn. The pushback began in the 3rd century. Physicians, who were often also priests, started writing treatises against Christian healing. They called it superstition, trickery, demonic deception. They claimed Christians were making pacts with evil spirits to create the appearance of healing while actually damning souls. The medical establishment and the pagan religious establishment united against a common threat: people healing without paying. Then something changed that made everything worse. In 313, Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity. For centuries, scholars have celebrated this as the moment Christianity became legal, accepted, powerful. But something else happened that is rarely discussed. Christianity became institutionalized. The wild, spirit-led, radically decentralized movement that practiced healing in homes became an official state religion with hierarchy, real estate, political power, and budgets. And with institutionalization came control. The church leaders, who now had access to imperial authority, faced a choice. Allow the healing practices to continue as they had been, available to all, controlled by none, generating no revenue, or regulate them, centralize them, make them dependent on official church approval. They chose control. The Council of Nicaea in 325 is famous for establishing the doctrine of the Trinity and determining which books would be in the Bible. But another agenda was operating beneath the theological debates: the question of who gets to heal and under what circumstances. The councils that followed over the next 2 centuries systematically dismantled the open healing practices. First, they declared that only ordained clergy could perform laying on of hands for healing. This removed the practice from ordinary believers. Then they required that healing be accompanied by specific prayers to specific saints, prayers only the clergy knew. This created dependency. Then they taught that healing was not guaranteed, that God might choose not to heal, that suffering might be more spiritually beneficial than health. This lowered expectations and excused failures. And finally, they condemned as heretical any teaching that said humans could command healing, that believers could speak with divine authority, that ordinary people could access the same power that worked through Jesus. The practices went underground. Small communities, later called Gnostic, Montanist, Marcionite, all labels used to justify persecution, continued teaching imposition in secret. They preserved the techniques in coded language and texts they buried in caves and jars, hoping future generations would find them. And we did. In 1945, an Egyptian farmer digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi struck a large clay jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts. Many were Gnostic gospels that church councils had ordered destroyed 16 centuries earlier. But buried within those texts were also detailed descriptions of healing practices: how to position hands, what words to speak, how to enter the state of henosis, how to see past sickness to the divine blueprint beneath. The texts confirmed what historians had suspected but could not prove. Early Christian healing was not about miracles in the sense of supernatural exceptions to natural law. It was about understanding that consciousness is the primary reality and matter is secondary. That spirit organizes matter, not the other way around. And that humans, when aligned with Source, can reorganize matter, including sick bodies, simply by recognizing and declaring what is true at the spiritual level. Let me take you deeper into why this works. Modern science, particularly quantum physics, has discovered something the early Christians practiced. Observation affects reality. The famous double-slit experiment proved that particles behave differently when observed. The observer effect demonstrates that consciousness and matter are not separate, they interact. They influence each other. The early Christian healers understood this 2,000 years before scientists could measure it. When a healer looked at a sick person and saw only wholeness, that observation was not passive, it was active, it was creative. The healer's consciousness, aligned with divine consciousness, imposed a pattern of wholeness onto the sick person's energy field. And the body, which is always trying to return to its divine blueprint, responded. The symptoms were not the true condition. The symptoms were the material expression of a spiritual misalignment. Correct the spiritual misalignment and the symptoms resolve. This is why the healings were instant. They were not asking a distant God to intervene in the natural order. They were restoring the natural order by recognizing it, aligning with it, and declaring it. But if this understanding becomes widespread, what happens to the pharmaceutical industry? What happens to the medical establishment? What happens to every system built on the assumption that healing requires external intervention, expert knowledge, expensive treatments, and long-term dependency? Those systems cannot allow the truth to spread, so they do what the church councils did. They classify the alternative as dangerous, unproven, heretical. They marginalize the practitioners. They demand studies that use the wrong framework to measure the right results. They protect the industry by controlling the narrative about what healing is and how it works. But the power never left. The practices still work. And the people who are ready to remember are finding their way back. Right now, place your hand over your heart. Feel it beating. That heart has been trying to heal your whole life. Every cell in your body is programmed to return to wholeness. The only question is whether you will align with that programming or continue believing the narratives that keep you sick and dependent. I am going to give you the basic framework of imposition exactly as it was practiced in those early Christian communities, not as history but as practice, something you can use tonight. Step 1. Enter recognition. Before you can heal yourself or anyone else, you must establish absolute knowing that sickness is not the deepest truth. The deepest truth is the divine blueprint, the perfect template that existed before the illness. Sit quietly, close your eyes, see yourself or the person you are working with not as they appear but as they truly are in spirit. Whole, radiant, complete. Hold this image until it feels more real than the symptoms. Step 2. Create alignment. Place one hand above your head, not touching, just hovering a few inches above the crown. Place the other hand over your heart, also hovering. You have just created a circuit from source to body. Feel the warmth begin to build in your palms. That warmth is the frequency beginning to flow. You are not generating it, you are allowing it. Step 3. Speak declaration, not a prayer, not a request, a statement of what is true. 3 words are enough: I am whole. Or if you are working with another person, you are whole. Speak it once with absolute certainty. Then be silent. Feel the shift. The energy will move, the frequency will impose itself, and the body will respond. Do not expect fireworks, do not wait for dramatic signs. The healing is happening at a level beneath conscious awareness. Your only job is to hold the knowing and speak the truth. Let me tell you what happens when you begin practicing this. First, resistance will come. Thoughts will tell you it is not working, doubts will flood in. This is normal. The part of you that has been trained to seek healing outside yourself is threatened by the possibility that you have carried the power all along. Ignore those thoughts. Return to recognition. Second, physical sensations may arise: heat, tingling, pressure, even brief intensification of symptoms as energy moves through blocked areas. Do not interpret these as failure, they are signs of reorganization. Third, emotional releases may occur. Tears, laughter, sudden memories, waves of grief or joy. Sickness is often stored emotion. When the spiritual misalignment corrects, the emotions release. Let them move, do not analyze, just allow. And fourth, results may be immediate or gradual. Some healings happen in seconds. Others unfold over days as the body catches up to the spiritual shift that already occurred. Do not measure success by speed. Measure it by alignment. Are you returning again and again to the practice? Are you holding the knowing even when symptoms persist? Are you speaking the declaration with increasing certainty? That is the measure. Now let me tell you what the early Christians knew about why some healings seem not to work. They understood that every person has free will at the soul level. Some sickness serves a purpose in a person's spiritual development. Some suffering is chosen before birth as a catalyst for growth. The healer's job is never to override that choice. The healer's job is to offer the frequency of wholeness and allow the person's higher self to accept it or not. This is why Jesus said your faith has healed you, not his power, their alignment, their readiness, their soul's yes. When you practice imposition on yourself, you are both healer and recipient. You are offering the frequency to yourself and accepting it simultaneously. This is actually easier than healing others because there is no separation, no question of another person's readiness. You are working with your own system and your system wants to heal. Here is what the church never wanted you to understand. You do not need them, you never did. The power that worked through Jesus works through you, the same source, the same frequency, the same capacity to reorganize matter through aligned consciousness. The only difference is that Jesus knew it and you forgot. But forgetting is not permanent. Right now in this moment you're remembering, and that remembering is dangerous to every system built on your dependency. This is why they classified these practices as heresy. Not because they did not work, because they work too well. If you can heal yourself, you do not need their prayers. If you can access Source directly, you do not need their priests. If you understand your true nature, you do not need their salvation narrative. You are already whole, you are already divine, you are already connected. The ringing in your ears, the pull toward hidden knowledge, the sense that you have always been different, these are not random. These are signs that you are one of the ones who came here to remember and to help others remember. The healing practices were just the beginning. The early Christians who practiced imposition also practiced direct knowing, energetic sight, communication with what they called the Christos, the anointed consciousness that is available to all. Not trapped in one historical person, these practices too were suppressed. These teachings too were burned, but they survived in fragments, in whispers, in lineages that hid for centuries. And now the fragments are coming back together. If this teaching has activated something in you, if you feel the truth of it in your body, even if your mind is skeptical, comment the words, "I am ready to heal." Not for me, for you. Let your declaration be witnessed. Let other people who are waking up see that they are not alone. Subscribe to this channel because the practices that are coming go even deeper. How to see energy, how to communicate with your higher self, how to access the Akashic records that the early Christians called the Book of Life. Like this video so it reaches the people who are searching for what was stolen from us. The industry that benefited from suppressing these practices is still operating, still controlling narratives, still classifying alternatives as dangerous, but their time is ending. More people are waking up every day, more people are remembering what they truly are. More people are reclaiming the power that religion tried to lock away behind priests and prayers and payments. You came into this world carrying a divine spark, and that spark includes the capacity to heal, not someday, not after more study, not when you are more worthy. Right now, place your hand over your heart one more time, feel that beat. And know that the same intelligence that keeps that heart beating without your conscious effort can heal anything in your body when you align with it, recognize it, and declare it. The healing practices of early Christians were not lost. They were hidden, and now you have found them. What comes next is the most important part, because knowing this history, understanding these practices is not enough. You must integrate them into your daily life or the knowledge becomes another spiritual concept floating in your mind, disconnected from your body, disconnected from your power. This is exactly what happened to institutional Christianity. The knowledge was preserved, but the practice was abandoned. The texts survived, but the lived experience was lost. And when practice dies, power dies with it. So here is your assignment for the next 7 days. Every morning when you wake, before you check your phone, before you engage with anyone else, spend 5 minutes in recognition. Sit quietly, place your hand over your heart, and see yourself as you truly are in spirit, not the version of you that struggles or doubts or carries wounds, the version of you that is eternal, whole, radiant. The version that existed before you were born and will exist after this body returns to dust. Do this without trying to feel anything, without waiting for validation. Just see, just know, by day 3 something will shift. By day 7 you will understand at a cellular level that this is not a belief system you are adopting. This is a remembering of what you always knew. On the 8th day, begin to offer this frequency to one other person, someone close to you, someone suffering. Not by telling them about it, by holding recognition for them in your private practice. Place their image in your mind during your morning session. See them whole, see them healed, see them radiant. Speak their name once with absolute certainty and say they are whole. Then release it. Do not tell them what you are doing. Do not expect them to know. The frequency works whether they know or not, whether they believe or not, because belief is not required. Alignment is required, and you are providing the alignment. What you are beginning is the restoration of what was taken, not for yourself alone, though the benefits to you will be undeniable. For the collective, every person you help remember carries that frequency forward. Every healing you practice ripples outward in ways you cannot trace. The early Christians understood this. They knew that healing one person shifted the consciousness of everyone connected to them. It changed families, it changed communities, it changed the trajectory of civilizations. This is why the suppression was so violent, not because the healing practices were fake or dangerous to those who practiced them, but because they were real and dangerous to those who profited from sickness and dependency. You are now part of a lineage that survived 17 centuries of persecution. Your willingness to practice this, to integrate it, to teach it, makes you a link in an unbroken chain stretching back to those early Christians who risked everything to preserve these teachings. That is not metaphorical. That is literal. The consciousness that flows through you when you practice imposition is the same consciousness that flowed through them. The same source, the same frequency, the same undeniable power, and now it flows through you. You are not separate from them, you are continuity with them. You are the answer to their prayers spoken in secret chambers 2,000 years ago that someday these practices would reemerge. Someday someone like you would remember. Someday the power would flow again through ordinary believers in ordinary homes, changing the world without permission from anyone. That time is now.